At 64, Eustace Conway looked like a figure carved straight out of the land, weathered, calm, but carrying something in his eyes that didn't belong there. Something heavy. Something unsettling. The kind of weight that wasn't visible unless you knew him, unless you had watched him with admiration for years, believing he was untouchable, indestructible, eternal. Most people know the legend, the wild man who defied society, who built his world from the earth with his own hands, who lived as if the modern world had never been invented. But what happened to him at 64, what he faced behind these quiet walls, left everyone shocked, shaken, and heartbroken. The fire pops, sparks jumping upward. Eustace doesn't flinch. Something has changed. But we begin this story not with the moment that broke him. No, that comes much later. To understand what happened, we must go back. Back to the boy he once was, the young man the world tried to tame, and the unbreakable spirit he forged in the wilderness long before anyone knew his name. Because only by knowing the life he built can we understand the devastation of what came after. Long before the cameras, the books, the documentaries, and the thousands of people who traveled to Turtle Island seeking wisdom, there was just a boy standing in the woods behind his childhood home. A boy who felt suffocated by walls and electrified by trees. Eustace Conway was not the kind of child who waited for adults to tell him what was possible. Even before he could properly explain it, he knew the world expected him to live a certain way: quiet classrooms, polite expectations, futures built from paperwork and predictable routines. But none of that felt real to him. None of it felt alive. What felt alive were the forests that stretched out beyond the backyard. The sound of branches cracking beneath his feet. The smell of pine resin and dirt. The flash of deer bolting through the underbrush. The whispering hush of wind threading itself through the tallest trees. He listened to nature the way other children listened to their parents. He studied the world not through textbooks but through his fingertips. The roughness of bark, the taste of cold river water, the warm pulse of a horse under his hand. He didn't simply visit the outdoors, he dissolved into it. His childhood wasn't easy. His home was strict, structured, sometimes harsh in ways that shaped him more than he ever spoke about. Expectations pressed on him like weights he was too young to name. But the forest, that was where he breathed freely. Where nobody criticized him for thinking differently, moving differently, dreaming differently. It didn't take long for his family to realize that Eustace didn't just love nature. He belonged to it. By the time he reached early adolescence, he could track animals through dense brush, build shelters from almost nothing, and travel miles on foot with the confidence of someone twice his age. His mother often looked out the window and found him already gone, already a small figure vanishing into the green. He wasn't running away. He was running toward the place that understood him. School felt tighter, narrower, more suffocating each year. Teachers admired his intelligence but couldn't understand why he refused to sit still, why he stared out the window as if the trees were calling his name. And maybe they were. Because by the time Eustace turned 17, he had decided that the world had taken enough of him. He wouldn't sit under fluorescent lights while life waited elsewhere. The wilderness had become his true home. And he was ready to live in it, fully, completely, fearlessly. But nobody, not even those closest to him, understood what that choice would cost, or what it would eventually shape him into. Most teenagers rebel with loud music, arguments, or lateness. Eustace rebelled by walking into the woods, building a teepee with his own hands, and living there. 17 years old. No roadmap. No permission. Just raw determination, skill, and the quiet belief that he could shape a life different from anything he had ever seen. His teepee wasn't a makeshift experiment, it was a complete home. He cut the poles, dried the hides, stitched the coverings, and crafted a living space disciplined enough to withstand storms and comfortable enough to last through winter. That teepee became more than shelter. It became a declaration. I will not live by the expectations of this world. I will live by the truth I feel in my bones. Most people would crumble trying to live his version of simple. But for Eustace, that simplicity was freedom. Each morning, he woke with the sunrise pouring through the open flap, the air crisp and honest. Each night, he drifted asleep listening to owls calling through the darkness. He split wood to stay warm. He hunted and foraged to eat. He washed in cold streams. He learned, every single day, what nature required of him. But living alone in the wild carved him in ways even he didn't expect. The silence was not peaceful. Not always. Sometimes it pressed against him like a weight, forcing him to confront every fear, every insecurity, every shadow inside himself. No television. No phones. Just the crackle of fire, the patter of rain, and his own thoughts echoing louder than he wanted them to. Yet this was where he began to understand the true shape of his soul. This was where he proved to himself that he could survive anything. And this was where he learned the painful truth that when you choose the wild, you also choose a kind of loneliness that never fully leaves you, not even decades later. The boy who entered those woods was not the same man who walked out. He emerged harder, sharper, more certain, but also carrying a solitude that would follow him through every chapter of his life. A solitude that would one day make what happened at 64 feel even more devastating. Because for Eustace, the wild gave him everything. And in ways nobody saw coming. It also took its toll. There came a time in Eustace Conway's young adulthood when the world beyond his childhood forests began calling him in ways he could no longer ignore, as if wild rivers, mountain ridges, and distant horizons whispered his name every time he stood still for too long. He answered that call the only way he knew how, by moving, by stepping into the unknown, by testing the limits of a life lived without walls. He paddled down the Mississippi River in a simple handmade canoe, letting the currents pull him through stretches of America most people only see on maps, sleeping under open skies, soaking in the silence, and learning more about himself with every bend in the river. Later he walked the vast and demanding Appalachian Trail, pushing mile after mile beneath his boots, carrying only what he needed, and discarding every illusion of comfort that modern life tried to teach him. Each step shaped him, hardened him, and clarified his deepest belief, that a person becomes closest to truth when stripped of everything unnecessary. And then came the horseback journey across America, a ride thousands of miles long that tested his endurance, his spirit, and even his sanity. Crossing deserts, prairies, highways, farmlands, and forgotten towns, he discovered the real reason he sought these punishing quests, not to escape society, but to understand why he had never truly belonged to it. These travels changed him, carving into him a conviction that the life everyone else accepted so easily was not the one meant for him. He needed a place, a sanctuary, where the old ways could live again. And somewhere on those long trails, the seed of that dream began quietly to grow. By the time Eustace returned from his journeys, he was no longer just a young man searching for purpose. He was a man who had absorbed the lessons of rivers, mountains, storms, and open plains, and he carried those lessons like sacred stones in his chest. With that clarity, he acquired a stretch of land deep in the North Carolina woods, a place wild enough to reflect the world he believed humans had lost. He named it Turtle Island, inspired by the ancient Native American myth that the world rests on the back of a giant turtle, steady and enduring. From the moment he stepped onto the land, he began building not merely a homestead, but a living testament to a forgotten way of life. He cut timber by hand, raised cabins from the earth, crafted shelters, barns, storage sheds, and teaching grounds with nothing but sweat, muscle, and unyielding vision. Volunteers came, young, old, curious, lost, drawn by Eustace's fierce philosophy and the promise of learning skills modern society had abandoned. Together they hauled logs, tanned hides, lit fires without matches, forged tools, and carved a community from silence. But building a world almost entirely by hand came with exhaustion and constant strain. The more Turtle Island grew, the more responsibilities pressed down on Eustace's shoulders. Every broken tool, every failing fence, every injured animal, every exhausted visitor wanting guidance fell to him. Still, he pushed forward, refusing to compromise, refusing to deviate from the purity of his vision. Turtle Island became beautiful, inspiring, and astonishing. Yet beneath that beauty, the weight of leading such a place began to carve cracks he did not yet see forming. As Turtle Island matured, Eustace developed not just a lifestyle, but an entire philosophy, one that would later be described, often with awe, as belonging to the last American man. He lived by iron principles forged from years of surviving in the wild. Discipline so rigid that laziness had no place beside him, self-reliance so complete that even asking for help felt like betrayal, simplicity so profound that each item in his life had a purpose or had no place at all. He taught students not merely how to start a fire or tan a deer hide, but how to understand the patience, humility, and focus required to work with nature rather than demand from it. He believed modern society created fragile people, people disconnected from reality, afraid of discomfort, and unaware of how capable they truly were. But nature, he said, stripped away illusions. Nature revealed truth. Nature demanded honesty. And while he dedicated himself to passing on those truths, the emotional toll grew heavier with each passing year. The long days, the physical labor, the constant teaching, the pressure to live as an example. These things isolated him, even as they elevated him. The more Turtle Island became known, the more people sought him out, and the more he carried the burden of being the symbol of a lifestyle few had the strength to choose. For all his resilience, even a man who slept beneath stars and walked barefoot through forests could not escape the quiet ache of being different from everyone around him. For years, Eustace Conway lived as if the modern world did not concern him, quietly building a life bound to the rhythms of wind, water, and forest. But the world eventually found him. Writers came first, intrigued by rumors of a man who rode horses across the country and lived in a teepee through winter snows. They expected to meet an eccentric recluse, Instead, they discovered someone articulate, sharp-eyed, and deeply principled.
Word spread.
Journalists arrived, then filmmakers, each one drawn to the unpolished authenticity of a man who didn't pretend to be anything other than exactly who he was. When he appeared on radio interviews and documentaries, audiences responded with a kind of reverence. Viewers admired him, not just for his lifestyle, but for his fearlessness in choosing it so completely. His name began circulating beyond outdoor communities, reaching living rooms across America. People saw him as a living blueprint of freedom, self-reliance, and courage. Something increasingly rare in a rapidly changing world. But fame, even the quiet kind, carries weight. Turtle Island Preserve, once his private sanctuary, became a destination for admirers who wanted to glimpse the mythical pioneer they'd seen on TV. Letters piled up. Volunteers asked to learn. Fans drove hours just to meet him at the gate. It was flattering, yes, but also overwhelming. He had never sought a spotlight, never desired applause. What he wanted was a simple life rooted in the land. Yet the more his name grew, the harder it became to protect that life. With every smiling visitor came more questions, more expectations, more pressure. Eustace began to feel the shift. The world he had escaped was slowly pushing its way back toward him. The contrast between admiration and intrusion became a daily struggle. And beneath the surface, quiet, subtle, but unmistakable, something inside him began to strain. The first signs of trouble came not from nature, but from people in positions of authority. Regulations, inspections, permit requirements, paperwork that clashed with a life built entirely outside of bureaucracy. Turtle Island had always operated on old-world principles, hand-built structures, experiential learning, natural methods. But modern codes demanded measurements, certifications, and compliance with rules that felt designed for cities, not forests. Eustace tried to explain, tried to reason, tried to show that his buildings were not just shelters but the result of hundreds of years of traditional craftsmanship. His words rarely landed. To some officials, he wasn't a teacher preserving heritage, he was a problem to be managed. Disputes escalated. Notices were posted. Restrictions increased. At times, it felt like his entire way of life was under siege. Workshops were disrupted. School programs were halted. The land grew strangely quiet, stripped of the laughter and wonder of the children who had once learned there. And for Eustace, the emotional toll was immense. He had always fought the elements, storms, floods, wild animals, but he had never expected to fight the very society he was trying to help reconnect with the natural world. Friends watched the light in his eyes dim slightly, replaced by frustration and disbelief. The preserve he had poured his soul into for decades suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable, caught in a battle he never asked for. As tensions grew, so did the whispers. Community members disagreed. Some supported him fiercely. Others questioned his methods. Rumors spread like brushfire, twisting reality into shadows. Even those who cared deeply for him sensed that his struggle was moving into darker, heavier territory. Something had shifted. Something deeper was brewing. Something that would push him further than any mountain trail or cross-country ride ever had. To the outside world, Eustace remained the same unbreakable man they had watched on television. Confident, resourceful, endlessly capable. But those closest to him knew the truth. Living off the land was never easy, and protecting a vast preserve was nearly impossible for one person to shoulder alone. Years of chopping wood, hauling logs, maintaining trails, guiding students, solving disputes, speaking to media, and fighting legal battles had begun to show in his posture, in the fatigue behind his smile, in the quiet moments when he sat alone at the edge of the forest staring into the distance. Physical exhaustion crept in slowly, the kind a camera never captures. Joints stiffened. Recovery took longer. The cold felt deeper than it had in his younger years. Emotionally, the strain was even heavier. Isolation, once a chosen companion, grew into a weight pressing against his chest. The responsibility of preserving Turtle Island rested fully on his shoulders, and no matter how many volunteers came and went, Eustace always felt he had to carry the hardest parts alone. Nights that once brought peace now brought worry, about money, about lawsuits, about aging, about the possibility that everything he built could be taken away. His determination had never wavered, but determination is not the same as invincibility. Behind his stoic presence, there were moments of doubt he never spoke aloud. And then there was time, the one adversary even he could not outmaneuver. At 64, the wilderness was still his home, but the years had etched themselves gently into his body and deeply into his heart. Cameras didn't show the slower mornings, the quiet sighs, the moments when he leaned against a tree not to admire it, but to steady himself. Viewers only saw the legend. They didn't see the man carrying a lifetime of battles, losses, fears, and hopes as heavy as any log he had ever lifted. For a man who lived so deeply connected to the land, human relationships were always more complicated. People often assumed that a life of rugged independence meant emotional invincibility, but in truth, Eustace Conway carried an ache that no camera ever captured. The ache of a man who loved, yet never stayed long enough, or never allowed himself, to hold on to the kind of family most people take for granted. Over the years, he met women who admired him, who loved his spirit, who felt drawn to his wildness, but living beside a man married to the wilderness required sacrifices few could endure. Eustace didn't just work long days, he lived within them. Every waking moment belonged to the land, the animals, the structures, the trails, and the endless list of tasks that determined whether Turtle Island survived another season. Relationships faltered not because he lacked love, but because he had bound himself to a calling that consumed everything else. Friends came and went, volunteers poured in eager to learn and equally eager to return to the comfort of modern life once they realized how relentlessly hard true self-sufficiency really was. Students admired him, some even adored him, but admiration is not the same as companionship. Eustace taught countless people how to split wood, ride horses, track animals, and respect the earth. But at the end of each day, when the sun sank behind the mountains and the last echo of laughter from camp faded, he often found himself alone. People saw him as a mentor, a guide, a symbol, but rarely as a man with his own quiet vulnerabilities. And though he never complained, those who knew him well noticed a subtle heaviness in the way he spoke about the years passing. He had given everything to the wilderness. In return, it had shaped him into a legend, but it had also taken from him the warmth of a home, the consistency of belonging, and the grounded comfort of knowing someone would always be there when the fire burned low. When Mountain Men brought Eustace Conway into millions of homes, viewers fell in love with his straightforward honesty and raw authenticity. But fame complicated a life that had always been deliberately simple. The show elevated him from a local figure to a national icon, a man whose daily tasks, mending fences, hauling timber, tending to horses, suddenly became scenes broadcast across the world. And with that spotlight came expectations he never asked for. Television crews arrived with equipment, schedules, and the constant need to capture moments of his life, even when he was exhausted, frustrated, or simply longing for silence. Fans believed they knew him intimately, but what they saw on screen was only a fraction of the responsibilities he carried. Financially, people assumed the show brought him extraordinary wealth, but the truth was far more sobering. Turtle Island Preserve required constant resources: tools, materials, feed, repairs, legal fees, educational programs, and endless maintenance. Every dollar that came in seemed to evaporate into a new emergency or a secondary project. Fame did not lighten his burdens, it often amplified them. Crew members sometimes witnessed what viewers did not: the toll that long filming days took on his body, the fatigue deepening in his eyes, the silent moments when he leaned on a post just a little longer than usual. To the fans, he remained a symbol of unshakable resilience. To those behind the camera, he was a man trying with everything he had to keep his world standing while the outside world pressed in harder each year. And beneath it all, Eustace fought to remain true to himself, even as the glare of television tried to reshape him into something he wasn't. Running Turtle Island had always been hard, but as the years advanced, the challenges multiplied in ways that felt relentless. Structures aged faster than they could be repaired. Trails washed out every time storms rolled across the mountains. Horses needed care, equipment broke down, visitors increased, and the legal pressures that once came and went now hovered like a permanent shadow over the preserve. What had once felt like an adventure now felt like a battlefield. For the first time, Eustace began to sense the cracks forming, not in the land, but within himself. He pushed harder, stretched himself thinner, tried to be everywhere at once, and ignored the warning signs his body gave him. Friends noticed the shift. They saw him working late into the night, building, fixing, hauling, refusing to rest. They saw the strain etched across his shoulders, the slower movements, the occasional wince when he lifted something heavier than he should have. They tried to intervene gently, to persuade him to ease his pace, but Eustace always brushed away the concern. He had built Turtle Island from the soil upward, he could not imagine stepping back, not even a little. But the truth was undeniable: the workload was no longer the challenge of a young pioneer, it was the crushing weight of an aging man fighting to protect a dream that needed more bodies, more funding, more support than he had ever been willing to ask for. And beneath the physical demands came emotional ones. Staff turnover increased, causing instability. Volunteers left early, overwhelmed by the intensity of the lifestyle. Those who stayed loved the land but struggled to keep up. The cracks were not just in the structures, they were in the foundation of the world he had tried so hard to preserve. And for the first time, even he felt the tremor. At 64, Eustace Conway was still strong, stronger than most men half his age, but the years had settled into his bones in ways he could no longer ignore. Tasks that once energized him now drained him by midday. Lifting beams, chopping wood, repairing shelters, clearing trails. Everything took longer, hurt deeper, demanded more recovery. He never admitted this openly, but those close to him noticed his pauses becoming longer, his breathing heavier, the lines around his eyes deeper from both sun and strain. Aging was not the enemy. He accepted nature's cycles, but aging in a world built entirely on physical labor was something else entirely. Emotionally, the weight was harder than the physical decline. He felt the pressure of time tightening around him. He knew that Turtle Island's future depended on hands younger than his, yet finding committed, long-term help was increasingly difficult. Young people came seeking adventure, not responsibility. The few who stayed could not shoulder what he had carried for decades. And so he continued pushing himself beyond safe limits, not out of pride, but out of fear that everything he had built could slip through his fingers if he slowed down for even a moment. Privately, he struggled with the realization that the wilderness he loved so deeply did not make exceptions for age. Winter winds felt colder. Steep hills felt steeper. Tasks he once welcomed with a smile now required quiet moments of preparation, deep breaths, and the steadying of his spirit. The land had been his companion, his teacher, his home, but now, at 64, it had become his greatest test. And though he faced it with the same unyielding determination he always had, the silent battles were growing heavier, carved not by crisis, but by time itself. As Eustace moved deeper into his 60s, the question of legacy, something he had ignored for most of his life, began pressing on him with an urgency he could no longer push aside. Turtle Island had always been more than land. It was the living embodiment of his beliefs, his values, his history, and the lessons he wanted the world to remember long after he was gone. But the older he became, the more he realized how fragile everything truly was. Without him guiding the workshops, maintaining the structures, resolving conflicts, managing visitors, and teaching the skills only he knew in such depth, the preserve began to drift in ways he could feel but couldn't prevent. He tried to pass knowledge to younger volunteers, but few understood the depth of what he carried. They learned how to split wood, how to track animals, how to work with horses, but they didn't yet know how to read storms before they formed, how to interpret 100 smells in the forest, how to sense danger miles before it arrived. These were not lessons taught in hours. They were lessons carved through years of living close to the earth. The search for someone who could inherit not just the tasks but the philosophy became a source of near-constant anxiety. Those with passion lacked discipline. Those with discipline lacked long-term commitment. Those with commitment lacked the raw, intuitive bond with the land that Eustace had cultivated since he was a child. And so he began to fear something that kept him awake at night, the possibility that Turtle Island might not survive without him. Every time he looked out across the fields, he imagined them empty. Every time he walked the trails at dusk, he wondered who would walk them when he no longer could. The uncertainty burrowed deeper, forming an internal conflict he could hardly speak aloud. He was torn between letting go and holding on, between trusting the next generation and believing that no one could ever carry his vision forward with the same devotion. The man who had once been unshakable now found himself standing on ground that felt painfully unsteady. It happened quietly, without warning, on a day that began like any other. A day filled with the familiar rhythm of chores, teaching, and endless movement. But beneath the surface, the pressure that had built for years finally reached its breaking point. Eustace had been pushing himself too hard for too long, ignoring the warnings in his body, the faint dizziness, the occasional tremble in his hands, the growing weight of exhaustion he carried from sunrise to past midnight. He told himself he could rest tomorrow. He told himself there was too much to do to slow down today. But tomorrow never came soon enough. On that day, as he was hauling a heavy beam with the same determination he had carried since youth, something inside him slipped. He felt a sudden weakness, a sharp wave of pain, and a disorienting realization that his strength, once limitless, had finally betrayed him. The beam dropped. His knees buckled. The world tilted in a way he had never experienced. For the first time in his life, Eustace Conway found himself unable to lift himself back up. Voices blurred around him. Someone rushed forward. Someone else called for help. And there, on the land he loved more than anything, the man who had always seemed immortal was suddenly frighteningly human. The collapse shook everyone around him. Word spread across Turtle Island, then across the community, then across the viewers who had followed him for years. This wasn't just an accident or a moment of fatigue. It was the devastating confirmation that the man who had spent his life defying the modern world had finally met the limits of his own body. Doctors later told him what he already suspected. Years of physical strain had accumulated into a serious health crisis. Rest was no longer optional. Continuing at the same pace was dangerous. Turtle Island could not be carried on his shoulders anymore. Not without consequences that frightened him in ways nothing in the wilderness ever had. For the first time in decades, Eustace faced a truth that broke him. He could not protect everything he built. In the days that followed, Turtle Island felt strangely hollow, as if the land itself sensed the shift in its guardian. The workshops were quieter, the fields less lively, the trails less traveled. Staff gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, unsure how to move forward without the man who had always been the anchor of the preserve. Some were frightened, others were heartbroken. Volunteers who once looked to Eustace for direction realized, with sinking certainty, that they no longer had a clear path to follow. They tried to continue the routines, feeding animals, repairing fences, tending the gardens, but the absence of his presence changed the energy of everything. Even the horses seemed unsettled, pacing restlessly as if waiting for his familiar footsteps. Supporters from outside the preserve wrote messages filled with concern and disbelief. Fans who had admired him from afar struggled to accept that the unbreakable mountain man they had seen on television could be vulnerable. The truth was painful for everyone to confront. Turtle Island had been built around one man's strength, and without that strength guiding every corner of the preserve, the entire operation felt dangerously unstable. Financial questions emerged. Staffing concerns grew. Responsibilities piled up without anyone truly capable of carrying them. And in the silence left behind, the enormity of what Eustace had shouldered became clear to everyone who had ever watched him work. The land, once full of activity and resilience, now seemed subdued, almost grieving. The future of Turtle Island hung in limbo, suspended between uncertainty and fear. Eustace's collapse had not just shaken the preserve, it had shaken the foundation of the dream itself. A reality no one wanted to face began to settle in. Without him, everything might change forever. In the aftermath of the devastating moment, those who had known Eustace best began to share stories. Memories filled with admiration, gratitude, and tears. Former students spoke about the first time they learned to start a fire with nothing but friction, recalling how Eustace's eyes lit up when they succeeded. Volunteers remembered evenings around the campfire when he told stories of riding across America on horseback, not to impress anyone, but to remind them that adventure still existed for those brave enough to seek it. Crew members from Mountain Men shared private moments never caught on camera. Times when Eustace, exhausted after hours of filming, still insisted on finishing chores before resting because he didn't want the animals to go unchecked. Locals described the countless times he helped neighbors without expecting anything in return, fixing a roof here, rescuing a horse there, offering quiet support to families who found themselves struggling. Friends spoke about his constant generosity, his ability to listen deeply, his unwavering loyalty to anyone who treated the land with respect. Many wept as they spoke, unable to reconcile the image of the powerful, tireless woodsman with the reality of the man now forced to slow down. To them, he had always been a pillar, steady, unmovable, a force of nature. Seeing him vulnerable felt like watching a mountain crumble. But alongside the sadness came gratitude. People realized how profoundly he had shaped their lives. They talked about how he had changed the way they saw the world, how he had taught them self-reliance, resilience, compassion, and humility. These testimonies became a mosaic of the man Eustace truly was, not just an icon, but a profoundly influential teacher and soul. And as they spoke, one truth echoed again and again. No matter what happened next, the impact of his life would continue to ripple outward, touching people he would never even meet. In the weeks following Eustace Conway's collapse, the future of Turtle Island stood at a crossroads. For the first time in its history, the preserve had to operate without the constant presence of the man who had built every trail, lifted every beam, and guided every person who had ever walked through its gates. What had once been a one-man miracle now had to become a collective effort, and the transition was anything but smooth. Decisions that Eustace once made instinctively now required long discussions, meetings, and compromises, things Turtle Island had never been accustomed to. Leadership roles shifted awkwardly. Responsibilities were reassigned. The preserve, once a reflection of a single man's clear vision, now felt like a puzzle being held together by people trying their best to understand how he had done it all for so long. Financial pressures mounted. Programs that depended on Eustace's personal teaching struggled to continue without him. Some volunteers stepped up, working tirelessly to stabilize what they could. Others, overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, quietly drifted away. Yet amid the uncertainty, something surprising began to emerge, a sense of shared determination. People who had once relied on Eustace for every answer began to lean on each other. Former students returned to help. Local supporters donated time, labor, and resources. The cracks in the foundation were still there, but for the first time, the effort to repair them wasn't resting solely on his shoulders. It was as if the community finally understood that the only way to protect Turtle Island was to become the very strength Eustace had embodied for decades. Even so, the road forward was steep. Every decision carried emotional weight. Every improvement felt like both progress and a reminder of what had been lost. There was no denying that the scars remained. Scars left not only on the land but on the hearts of everyone who had watched Eustace fall. Yet in the quiet resilience of those who stayed, there was a growing belief that perhaps his vision could survive, not because one man carried it, but because many finally chose to. To millions of viewers, Eustace Conway was a symbol of strength, a man carved from the wilderness itself. But behind the legend lived a deeply complex human being. Shaped by love, loss, duty, fear, and the overwhelming pressure of a mission larger than any one person was meant to carry. Those who had spent years beside him knew that his passion for the natural world was inseparable from the emotional battles he rarely revealed. He was a man who felt everything intensely: victory, frustration, joy, and heartbreak, but expressed it only through work, through the long silent hours he spent carving wood, walking trails, and mending fences. Nature was not just his home, it was his refuge from a world that often made him feel misunderstood. He had regrets he almost never spoke of, relationships he wished he could have held onto longer, moments when his stubbornness cost him opportunities, times when he pushed people away without meaning to. He feared becoming irrelevant, feared the slow decline of age, feared losing the land that had given his life purpose. Yet he also carried triumphs that few men ever experience: crossing the United States on horseback, building a living preserve from nothing, inspiring thousands of people to reconnect with the earth, becoming a national figure without ever compromising his core identity. His life philosophy, simple, raw, rooted in truth, saved him in many ways, giving him purpose and clarity. But it also demanded sacrifices so large that most people would never choose them. To understand the man behind the legend was to understand that his story was not defined by perfection, but by an unyielding devotion to something bigger than himself. He was flawed, he was human, he was vulnerable, and that humanity, more than anything, was what made his collapse so devastating. It didn't shatter an icon. It revealed the cost of becoming one. Even as Turtle Island grappled with uncertainty, something remarkable began taking shape. The legacy Eustace had built did not fade, it deepened. People who had once visited for a weekend camp suddenly felt an urge to return and give back. Former students organized workshops and gatherings to keep his teachings alive. Local families stepped in to help repair structures and maintain trails. The spark he had ignited in thousands had grown into a quiet but powerful movement. His collapse, while heartbreaking, had awakened an awareness of how desperately his work was needed, how easily it could disappear, and how much responsibility fell on the shoulders of those he had inspired. The land itself seemed to respond. New growth appeared in areas that had been barren for seasons. Wildlife patterns shifted in ways that reminded longtime volunteers of the preserve's earliest years. The very spirit of Turtle Island, raw, resilient, full of life, refused to fade. It adapted. It evolved. It began transforming into something he might not have envisioned, but would have deeply appreciated: a community-driven sanctuary shaped not by one man's strength, but by the collective will of many who believed in his mission. Workshops resumed slowly. Educational programs returned with fresh creativity and renewed purpose. People spoke of Eustace not as a fallen figure, but as the guiding force who had brought them together and taught them the value of connection, to the land, to the past, and to each other. The devastation had sparked a rebuilding effort rooted in love rather than obligation. And in that effort, Turtle Island discovered something profound: Eustace's legacy was not bound to his physical presence. It lived in every hand that turned soil, every fire that was sparked with ancient methods, every trail walked with respect. His teachings had become a living inheritance, one that refused to die. If you've stayed with us through this emotional journey into the life of Eustace Conway, then you already know how important his story is, how deeply it reminds us of resilience, loss, and the fragile threads that bind a life to the land it loves. If you want more videos just like this one, filled with truth, mystery, make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss what comes next. Your support helps us continue bringing untold stories to light.